You've heard the legend of the Buddha's life and the monumental moments under the Bodhi tree. But what about the final chapter? No one teaches you about the last meals, the parting instructions, the shivering awareness at the edge of death. Today, we step into the twilight of his journey to uncover the hidden drama of his final days. I'm Silent Flame, and in this 8-part exploration, we'll trace every step he took toward Parinirvāṇa, revealing lessons lost in translation and the words he chose to leave behind. When the Buddha felt the first tremors of illness, he was not a frail old man, but a luminous presence moving through villages, drawing crowds with his silent magnetism. The departure. According to the Parinirvāṇa Sutta, he left Venuvana forest on Vasa, a time when monks wander, feeling the onset of an ailment, said to be dysentery. Disciples fell into a hush. The master's gait slowed, yet his gaze stayed unwavering. The alms rounds. At Pava, the former merchant Kunda offered him a final meal, sukaramadava, often mistranslated as pig's delight, but more literally tender pork, or the most delicate mushroom. Was it food poisoning, or a symbolic curtain call where the last taste becomes the final teaching? The silent procession. Villages and groves blurred into Dharma space as he moved eastward to Kala Grove under sal trees. Each step became a lived sermon: impermanence, suffering, non-self. The earth itself seemed to honor his passage. Flowers fell in rainless wind. Birds hushed their song. He walked not toward death, but toward the consummation of awakening. His voice grew softer, but each word burned like a last ember on the verge of flame. Lessons to Ananda. At Vesali, he reminded Ananda, be your own lamp, rely on yourself, hold to the truth as a lamp. This insistence, no relic beyond the moment, echoed more profoundly as his strength waned. Guidance to the Sangha. To grieving monks, he said, all compounded things are subject to dissolution. Work out your own salvation with diligence. No promise of heavenly rescue, only the urgency of now. The condensed Dharma. When asked what constituted his final teaching, he uttered the twin verses. All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. All phenomena are without self. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. These two lines, like a master key, unlock the door to Parinirvāṇa. His last instructions were not words of comfort, but a blade cutting through reassurance, freeing us from clinging to any doctrine, even his own. When the Buddha's procession reached Malina, even the deer paused in the fringe forests. His frame bore the marks of illness, yet his presence lit every path. Malina's ceremony of farewell. Arriving at Mahamalina's grove, the Buddha was greeted by Maland, the royal elephant, an embodiment of regal devotion. Monks and lay people gathered. Some wept openly, others strove to maintain composure. He reminded them, grieve not as those without hope. Death is but a transition in the endless flow of becoming. Pava's final meal controversy. At Pava, Kunda the smith offered sukaramadava, a meal described variously as pork, a delicacy, or wild mushrooms. Scholarly debate. Meat interpretation argues it was a final test of non-attachment, exposing even the master to karmic consequences of meat eating. Mushroom theory suggests a locally prized fungus, misnamed by translators, which led to fatal food poisoning. The Buddha ate mindfully, declaring, eat not to gratify old habit, but to maintain the body for the Dharma. His last meal became more than nourishment. It was a living parable of impermanence and mindful choice. When he finally reached Kusinara's Kala Grove, he lay between twin sal trees, petals drifting like tears. The very earth seemed to mourn. The reclining posture. He assumed the lion's posture, lying on his right side, head supported by his hand, demonstrating dignified serenity even in collapse. Monks recited passages detailing the sal trees in bloom, a cosmic irony of new life beside one leaving this world. Earth's complaint. Legend holds that the earth shook, and thunder rolled as the cosmos acknowledged his final passage. Local villagers describe seeing a glow around his body, an aura of radiant calm. Ananda's vigil. Ananda, ever devoted, wept by his side. The Buddha spoke gently. Ananda, these tears bind you to sorrow. Rather, let your heart open to compassion for all beings. His words carried both tenderness and instruction. Suffering is universal. Grieve without clinging. In Kala Grove, the boundary between life and death shimmered, revealing death as a door, not an end. As the final hour neared, the Buddha's voice grew faint, but his clarity sharpened, each syllable a burning coal of revelation. Teaching on Ubhaya Dhamma, the twofold practice, he reminded the monks, attend to the Dhamma, both long and short, long being the great declarations I've spoken, short being the 5 precepts. This juxtaposition, vast vision and simple ethics, underscored his conviction. Liberation requires both panoramic insight and humble conduct. His counsel impelled them to hold the entire spectrum of his teaching, from the profound emptiness of phenomena to the everyday practice of right speech and action. Final emphasis on impermanence. He repeated the twin verses one last time. All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. All phenomena are without self. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. Then he added, be islands unto yourselves, relying on yourselves, and do not look to others for refuge. Here, the focus sharpened. Ultimate refuge lies in direct experience of truth, not in sacred relics or doctrines. His closing words were both a mirror and a map, reflecting our entanglement and pointing the way beyond. When word spread that the master lay dying, the entire Sangha converged. Forest monks, city mendicants, lay disciples, each carrying the weight of grief and awe, Ananda's heartbreak and resolve. Ananda, torn between despair and duty, knelt by the Buddha's side. Through tears, he clung to every breath, every whisper. Yet the Buddha gently chided, Ananda, mourn not as the ignorant. Let sorrow fuel your compassion for all beings. In that moment, Ananda transcended personal loss and embraced the task of preserving the Dharma. Monastic hymns and lamentations. The monks chanted the Pabajja and Pakavikana verses, calls to reflect on renunciation and self-examination, turning ritual into living witness. Lay followers sang plaintive laments, weaving circles of saffron robes and fragrant flowers around the grove. Their music was not a plea for his return, but an offering of gratitude, every note resonating with thank you and farewell. The silent communion. As chanting ceased, a profound silence fell. No sound but the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a lone bird. In that hush, each practitioner felt the Buddha's mind, calm, clear, and unbounded, flowing through their own awareness. It was a communion beyond words, the living Dharma present in the shared stillness. In that final gathering, form dissolved into formless presence. Sangha and Master, became one voice of awakened being. In that final instant, the Buddha's last breath became his most profound sermon, a living embodiment of impermanence, non-self, and the seamless passage beyond all conditioned existence. The final exhalation. As he uttered his last verse, his chest rose and fell one final time, an echo of every inhalation he'd ever taken under the Bodhi tree. Witnesses describe a hush so complete it seemed to suspend time. The Buddha's body, radiant with a subtle glow, lay perfectly still. In that exhalation, every breath of every being converged, a cosmic sigh of release from birth and death. The dissolution of form. Ancient texts tell of his limbs softening, features relaxing, as though the body itself dissolved into the grove's air. Petals rained from the sal trees above, each one a living reminder. Form arises, form passes away. The distinction between teacher and teaching vanished. His body became metaphor and mirror, teaching by its own unmaking. The silence that preceded dawn. For a full moment, the grove held its breath. No chant, no whisper, only the pulse of earth beneath saffron robes. Then, as dawn's first light touched the horizon, a single breeze rippled through the leaves, a benediction in motion. This gentle wind carried the echo of his final instruction: see and be free. His last breath was not the end of a life, but the opening of an endless teaching. In the days that followed, the Sangha faced a raw reality of loss, and from their collective grief sprang the rituals that would carry the Buddha's presence through the ages. The choice of cremation. At the village of Kusinara, local princes, Ajatashatru of Magadha and Pasenadi of Kosala, offered to honor the Buddha with royal rites. Guided by Ananda's counsel to honor simplicity, they chose cremation over lavish entombment. The pyre was constructed from 8 types of precious woods, symbolizing the eightfold path, burning away all defilements. The distribution of relics. After the pyre cooled, only sacred relics remained: teeth, bone fragments, and ashes, physical tokens of the Buddha's transformation. These relics were divided among 8 great kingdoms and clans, each enshrining them within stupas, silent teachers embedded in stone. Each stupa became a focal point for pilgrimage, devotion, and the living memory of his presence. The Sangha's vow monks gathered around the relics, renewing their commitment. As long as these relics endure, so shall the Dharma. Their vow transformed personal grief into collective guardianship, ensuring the Buddha's final teaching lived on in every recitation, in every bowed head. From that moment, the Sangha became the vessel of his continuing voice, carrying the flame of awakening across generations. In death he multiplied. His relics seeded stupas that blossomed into worlds of awakening. In the days following the cremation, word spread of uncanny occurrences, signs that the Buddha's passing was not an end, but a final gift to the world. Sacred wellspring at Rajagaha, a messenger bringing news of the Buddha's Parinirvāṇa, paused at a dry well. As he spoke the Master's name, water gushed forth, never to recede, seen as the Dharma's inexhaustible flow. Villagers reported that each dawn, the well's surface shimmered with lotus petals, though no flower grew nearby, symbols of purity rising from mud. The kinsman's tears. When the Buddha's family received his relics, it is said their weeping waters formed a stream whose current carried petals downstream, an outward echo of inner compassion. Scholars suggest this allegory underscores the power of collective grief, transformed into communal blessing, each tear a seed of empathy sowed across the land. Stupa flames, unquenchable chroniclers, record that lamps lit around the first stupas never extinguished. Winds blew, rains fell, yet the flame endured. This perpetual light came to signify the undying spark of awakening. Every pilgrim who circled the stupa felt the warmth of his abiding presence. Miracles after death are whispers, the Master's final sermon echoing through phenomena, inviting us to see the sacred in the everyday. Across Asia and now the globe, communities mark the Buddha's passing not as mourning alone, but as an annual celebration of his final teaching, the Feast of Release. Parinirvāṇa Day, Nirvana Day. In Mahayana countries, Japan's Nirvana-e, Korea's Jongwol, Daebareum, temples open their doors at midnight, chanting the Mahaparinirvāṇa Sutta in full. Monastics drape new robes on statues of the reclining Buddha, symbolizing both respect and the fresh clarity of his unconditioned mind. Stupa pilgrimages. Devotees journey to Kushinagar, plant flowers at the twin sal trees, and walk clockwise around the Nirvana stupa, each step a homage to the final path. Global Buddhist centers create replica groves, inviting local practitioners to experience the sacred geography no matter the distance. Meditative reflection services. Lay groups gather before images of the reclining Buddha, observing a day of silence, broken only by guided readings of his last verses. After each recitation, a bell tolls, reminding that every sound, like every life, arises and fades. Participants then share simple meals, mindfully, contemplating impermanence with each bite. Commemoration transforms loss into living legacy. Each ritual gesture, a step back toward the stillness he embodied in that final grove. In the wake of Parinirvāṇa, rulers and commoners alike faced existential panic. Yet from that crisis emerged the first state endorsements of the Buddha's teaching. Ajatashatru's edict at Rajagaha, the king of Magadha, once fierce in war, decreed a day of silence and reflection across his capital. Courtiers paused their duties. Markets fell still as royal heralds read aloud the Mahaparinirvāṇa Sutta under the banyan groves. Ajatashatru's inscription, later found on stone pillars, called the Dharma, the sovereign law beyond bloodlines, cementing the Sangha's moral authority. Pasenadi's proclamation in Kosala. In Kosala, King Pasenadi ordered that every monastery be granted land and tax immunity, an unprecedented act of religious sponsorship. Village elders recorded that alms bowls were filled from royal granaries for an entire rainy season, ensuring monks could focus solely on preserving the Buddha's discourses. This patronage transformed the Sangha from itinerant mendicants into a stabilized community, ready to codify teachings. Ceylon's mission under Mahinda years later, Emperor Ashoka's son, Mahinda, sailed to Sri Lanka bearing relic fragments and a codex of Vinaya rules. His mission won the favor of King Devanampiya Tissa, who converted his court and proclaimed Buddhism the island's spiritual backbone. Chronicles like the Mahavamsa commemorate how Mahinda's discourse under the Mihintala Peak echoed the Buddha's message of self-reliance and ethical clarity. From royal tongues to humble villages, the Buddha's final blessing became a charter for states to enshrine compassion and wisdom as public virtue. Faced with the Master's absence, the Sangha convened councils, oral and later written, to safeguard his words, birthing the earliest Buddhist canon. First council at Rajagaha. Shortly after the cremation, 500 arhats gathered in the Satapani cave, led by Ananda and Mahakasapa. Ananda recited suttas from memory, Upali chanted the Vinaya rules. Disputes over sequence were settled by consensus, forging the Nikaya texts. This assembly declared, "Let nothing be added or subtracted from the Dhamma and Vinaya," establishing the principle of canonical integrity. Second Council at Vesali, a century later, perceived laxity in monastic discipline prompted a second convocation of 700 monks. Disagreements over minor rules led to formal clarifications, preserving the Vinaya's strictures and preventing schism. The outcome reaffirmed, preservation of form ensures preservation of essence. Transition to written Pali Canon. In the 1st century BCE, under patronage of King Vatagamani of Sri Lanka, the oral tradition was committed to palm leaf manuscripts. Monks in the Aloka Maluva cave laboured for weeks, chanting aloud as scribes inscribed the Digha, Majjhima, Samyutta, Anguttara, and Khuddaka Nikayas. This monumental effort transformed fragile memories into enduring texts, securing the Buddha's voice against time's erasure. Through councils and script, the Sangha forged a living archive, each recitation a heartbeat, each inscription a vow not to let his final blessing fade. When the Buddha crossed that final threshold, the Sangha confronted an unprecedented question. Who are we without our guide? Parinirvāṇa became the looking glass in which the fledgling community saw both its fragility and its promise. Shock and self-reflection. Monks who had walked beside him for decades suddenly realized their vows were not to a person, but to the Dharma. The crisis triggered collective introspection. If not for him, what holds us together? This mirror forced every practitioner to examine intent. Was their practice loyalty to a teacher or allegiance to truth? Emergence of Sangha identity. As memories of his voice faded, the community coalesced around shared values: compassion, non-harming, diligent inquiry. The Sangha became defined not by geography or lineage, but by fidelity to his final injunctions. Be islands unto yourselves, and all compounded things are impermanent. Parinirvāṇa thus functioned as a crucible, purifying the Sangha's self-image from devotion to a person toward devotion to the path. Oral tradition's dynamic role. In village groves and city halls, disciples recited his last sermons, each rendition adapting to local accents and dialects. This dynamic oral transmission kept the teachings alive, but also introduced variations, nuances of tone, emphasis, and illustrative anecdotes. Parinirvāṇa became both anchor and catalyst. An anchor in its core verses, a catalyst in the myriad ways communities retold his final words. Death made his teaching portable, no longer bound to a single body. It flowed through every voice willing to carry it. As oral recitations multiplied, the need arose to fix the Dharma's final shaping in script. Parinirvāṇa catalyzed the transition from ephemeral breath to lasting palm leaf, from living sermon to written canon. Cultural contexts, shaping script. In North India, Brahmi script was evolving. Monks adopted it to transcribe suttas, blending Vedic orthography with vernacular Pali. In Sri Lanka, Sinhalese adaptations introduced diacritical marks to capture tonal subtleties, ensuring the Buddha's cadence survived the shift to ink. Each culture framed his last words within its literary conventions, metaphors of rivers, lamps, and lotus buds, infusing local resonance into universal truths. The canon as collective memory. Writing Parinirvāṇa passages onto palm leaves was an act of communal witnessing, a pledge that the final teaching would not vanish with any one monk's passing. Manuscript copying became a devotional practice. Each stroke of the stylus on leaf was a bow to the impermanence the text itself proclaimed. Scribes sang while they wrote, embedding the oral rhythm into the visual text, a living handshake between speech and symbol. Negotiating authenticity and adaptation councils wrestled with variant recensions. Should a beloved local anecdote be preserved if it lacked attestation elsewhere? The principle emerged: preserve the core suttas intact. Allow ancillary stories in appendices, honoring both canonical purity and the richness of lived tradition. Parinirvāṇa's verses remained inviolate, the bedrock upon which commentaries and chronicles would later build. In inscribing his last breath, the Sangha learned that permanence could arise only by embracing impermanence, fixing form in order to free the formless. Parinirvāṇa was not a farewell, but a seed, planted in grief and watered by devotion. It sprouted into centuries of remembrance, ritual, and insight. Today, his final act still echoes in every bell, every stupa, every breath of awareness, echoes in ceremony and silence. Every Nirvana day, temples illuminate candles in the dark, not as a vigil for what's lost, but as a celebration of freedom from birth and death. The reclining Buddha image, carved in stone and painted in murals, reminds us that the still form itself is an invitation to rest in that final peaceful openness. In monasteries, the recital of the Mahaparinirvāṇa Sutta at dawn carries his voice across centuries, each syllable a bridge between then and now. Stupas as living chrysanthemums. Stupas, once reliquaries, have become gardens of practice. Pilgrims circumambulate, each step a reflection on impermanence and interdependence. In Myanmar's plain, Sri Lanka's hills, Tibet's highlands, and Nepal's valleys, these mounded petals stand as living chrysanthemums, moments of his passing blossoming in the world. Parinirvāṇa in daily mindfulness. Modern practitioners pause at every exhale to remember his last breath, an act of silent solidarity across time. In mindfulness apps and silent retreats, his final verses guide inner inquiry. What is rising? What is passing? Thus, Parinirvāṇa enters kitchens, offices, and city buses, no longer confined to ancient groves, but alive in every pressing moment. His death became the world's mirror, each life a reflection of that final lesson: to see clearly, to let go wholly, to rest in the unconditioned. You have witnessed a human life consummate awakening, not in the breaking of a body, but in the gentle unmaking of self. You have traced his steps from forest to grove, his words from roar to whisper. Now, rest in the silent space beyond story. Let his final breath brush your mind with impermanence. Let his last verses echo in the chambers of your own heart. And know this: every ending he embraced becomes a beginning for you. I am silent flame. Carry this flame quietly, not as a trophy of knowledge, but as a beacon of release. In his passing, find your own way, breathing, letting go, awakening.